Apologies, due to a technical glitch that might just sound like your host, who is a seasoned radio actor and voice artist, so he would never have done the thing that it sounds like has been done, which is have his microphone facing in completely the wrong direction and creating a sound, therefore, that is rather too echoey, making it sound like it has been recorded in Nadine Dorris's library, or head. But nonetheless, that's the impression that the technical glitch might give. Apologies for that. It's only for episode 1 of Genesis of the Daleks. Normal service will be resumed in the next instalment. Please forgive me. You're listening to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a special guest to choose their favourite things about a particular Doctor Who story, and I have to guess what those things are.
All right, good morning, Toby. If morning it is. Right, here we go. My name is David Quantick. I'm a comedy writer, mostly. I write other things, and I do broadcasting. I'm also a big Doctor Who fan. I wrote The Dark Husband for Big Finish many years ago, and I also, by a strange coincidence, wrote a bit of The Thick of It, in which future Doctor Who, Peter Capaldi, is very rude about the children's movie Star Wars. My dad told me that I saw the first episode of Doctor Who from my pram, and I continue to be a fan. The story I am nominating is Genesis of the Daleks by Terry Nation. I love Genesis of the Daleks. It's the first really big Doctor Who story. It's the first one that kind of sets out a sort of uniqueness stall. Other Doctor Who stories have dealt with, his history and a kind of how do we get rid of Patrick Troughton? Oh, I know, Time Lords, they suddenly exist. But there'd never been what we now call a Who-niverse before. There'd never been a kind of context for Doctor Who. He just fought baddies, travelled around in a police box, met attractive young men and women, and that was it, really. So there was a sense of anticipation about this story. And Doctor Who was huge at this point. This particular edition got round about 10 million viewers per episode, which was a lot. But this was different. This was serious. This was Genesis of the Daleks. It's what we now call event television. And as we'll see, it was an event for me.
Well, welcome everybody to this Doctor Who commentary on a classic story. This is very exciting for me because regular listeners will know the wheeze of this is that I get a friend of mine to choose their favourite things from a Doctor Who story of their choice. However, I've never met today's subject, from whom you've just heard, David Quantick, though, who is a big deal in my world. He's a fantastic comedy writer. I'm a great admirer of his work. I once thought I'd done okay because I got to audition for a small part of something he'd written, which I didn't get. But for me, it just felt like victory to even be through the doors and reading something with his name on it. Always been a great fan of his satirical writing and his brilliant turn of phrase. So he went on Twitter and said, anyone know any podcasts I can go on to plug my latest thing, which you're going to hear all about, I'm sure, on this. Well, I know, because I will put his voice where it needs to go. And somebody atted me, and I said, well, my podcast isn't really right. It's just me wanging on about Doctor Who. And he said, well, I like wanging on about Doctor Who. So I said, well, look, if you want to choose a story, and then you can add your plug. So it meant I got a really special guest, and he got to plug his wares to you guys, which I'm sure will be of interest. So this is actually recorded not long before I release it. Most of the ones you hear as they come out are at least 6 months 6 months old, really, because I prepare them that far in advance for patrons who are ahead of you guys. unless your patron's listening now, but you know the score. But so this one I'm recording pretty close to release to tie in with when David's latest project is out there. So it's odd, isn't it, then, therefore, that Genesis of the Daleks, one of the show's acknowledged all-time classics, has been chosen. I mean, it was literally, I think, one of 6 unclaimed Tom Bakers. That was my slight worry when I said to David, you get to choose a story. Oh, here's the very dwindling list. But then I looked, and Green Death and Genesis were both there. So I thought, well, they're 2 classics that I'm really surprised haven't been chosen. Somebody has chosen Underworld, for goodness sake. And in that week, actually, somebody claimed Green Death and David claimed Genesis. So I'm very intrigued to see who will choose what is left. Loads of new series stuff left. It seems this is very much an exercise in nostalgia. So anyway, that's quite a long preamble, but I thought there was various things of note to mention there that were unusual for this particular podcast, which I'm flattered and grateful to you all for listening to. I hope you have your DVD ready. I have the little light illuminated next to play all, which is what I'm going to do, because I'm going to start this story at the beginning, as is tradition, with episode 1 of Genesis of the Daleks. Let's press play or select or whatever you would like to do in 3, 2, 1. Oh my goodness. This is... I'm quite a traditional creature. I like to think of myself as an iconoclast who bucks against the trend, and I don't like things that are popular just because everybody else likes them. And then when I see people going, I don't like Caves of Androzani or Genesis of the Daleks, think, what are they trying to prove? Idiots. Whereas, of course, what I'm trying to do there is patrols people's personal taste. People might just not like something and not be doing it because it makes them feel cool. However, I can't feel cool enough to say I don't like Genesis of the Daleks, which is an acknowledged classic of the show, because I think it's terrific. I remember when I first saw this scene. Well, I don't know if I remember when I first saw it, because I can't remember if it's on the compilation that was shown for Doctor Who and the Monsters. I was most used to this on a cassette tape that I listened to over and over again. But I love this slow motion. I don't know why. I think it's because it's just slightly unusual for Doctor Who. The chalk dust of the quarry, the smoke, we know gas masks are scary. It's because they're familiar, but we sort of, I think we're aware of how they feel and they look quite, but they're also reminiscent of a terrible time in recent history. But of course, the opening of Genesis to me was I stepped from the TARDIS into or whatever it is Tom Baker says at the beginning of the cassette, he meets the Time Lord, played by John Franklin Robbins, who I have met. Long deceased now, John Franklin Robbins, but he played Julius Caesar at the Ludlow Festival. So I hung around outside the stage door and met him and left a little questionnaire for him, and he answered my questions, fairly briskly. He just left a. I think I left a stamped addressed envelope, or I left them at the box office and came to pick them up. He said the idea of playing universals has always appealed to me, which is why I accepted a relatively small part. It is a small part, but it's a good part. Daleks. And I mean, I knew this exchange word for word. And so, yeah, John Franklin Robbins literally does, half a day on Doctor Who. But I think this is a great character and it's a good performance. And he's a Time Lord. But I don't sort of count him like the other Time Lords, because he's the Time Lord at the beginning of Genesis of the Daleks. I mean, it's a we don't know who this guy is, but it's a bit like Death playing chess in the Seventh Seal, isn't it? There's a bit of that going on. But this, I like the way that they've made this battlefield environment so spooky. It's Doctor Who in a quarry. It's not got anything unusual, machine guns and barbed wire and all of that sort of thing. But throw it together with this period of Doctor Who's history and the tone with which these stories are told, and I think it's something quite special. It's quite, to coin a phrase now, and which is going to be a little bit old-fashioned, it's quite sort of boys own adventure, and you know, my house was surrounded by, you know, Commando magazine, and you know, the world wars were used as sort of, you know, entertainment quite heavily when I was younger, and I had elder brothers who had all of that stuff. And Doctor Who seemed a little sort of safer and more fantastical than that, because, you know, we knew about the real. We knew that the world wars were real and horrible, although they were turned into sort of quite chipper adventures a lot of the time for kids. But to have that sort of stuff in Doctor Who did seem to confer a little bit of sort of harshness to Doctor Who that made it not for kids, and I was desperate for Doctor Who not to be for kids. Something's annoyed. It's brilliantly directed, this, but I think all of this is great. David Maloney does some fantastic location work, but you know, and it's grim, and it uses, as I say, the gas mask. Just that little crash zoom there into the gas mask. There is something about a gas mask, which is why Stephen Moffat was a genius to hit upon it for. And he took the genius an extra level by having a child's voice coming out of it, asking a simple question. But the horror of the gas mask, there is something, you know, stifling about it, and it's on a person, but it sort of dehumanises their face. And he's got a gun from Galaxy 4. I like all of this very economic storytelling. You know, oh, we found a dead body. It's got ancient and modern weapons. Playing rock music is a terrible joke, but it's played quite right, and it's sort of meant to be a terrible joke. It's all this stuff, war of attrition, only backwards. I mean, I listened to the cassette of this over and over again. So actually, Genesis was a story for people of my generation that was almost too familiar. So if there was a repeat of Doctor Who, so it was repeated for Doctor Who and the Monsters, which was Curse of Peladon, wasn't it? This, and I think Earthshock. Which was an unexpected series of repeats that my mum just went, there's a thing called Doctor Who and the Monsters on tonight. It was the Curse of Peladon, and it was 2 episodes edited together, so it was 50-minute instalments, and it was a cut down version of Genesis. I know there've been cut down versions before, but this is the one I remembered, and I was slightly disappointed because I knew there was a cassette of it kicking about. I don't know if I had the cassette at that point, but then I did get the cassette. I think I borrowed the cassette off my friend Ollie, and he just sort of let me keep it because I was the Doctor Who fan and he wasn't so much, and he always got things if he sort of wanted them, and I think there was a tacit understanding that, you know, I didn't, so therefore people are kind, aren't they? So I think Ollie let me have his Genesis of the Daleks cassette, and but then this was then repeated when they started the Pertwee repeats. They did Spearhead from Space and Doctor and the Silurians, and I'd got a VHS then, and I lived in my own house, you know, and so I was like, oh great, I can tape off air good quality recordings of, you know, of Doctor Who stories, and of course then they jumped to Genesis, which already got a good quality copy of, because had it been repeated at another time, it seemed ubiquitous. And I remember, and so Genesis was always a bit sort of over familiar, which shows how sort of spoilt you can be. The reason, because it was repeated more times than any other classic Doctor Who story. But part of you, if you know, was sort of going, yeah, but I know the general public might benefit from seeing Genesis, but I can't show the Invasion of Time. I've got a really terrible quality copy of that. But all of this stuff, interestingly, I remember when I first got it on video. You know, bootleggy piratey, probably from a Super Channel copy or something. All of this stuff isn't on the cassette, which is yet another edited version. It's surely the Doctor Who story that exists in the most different versions of the same thing. Sharda is a slightly different thing. You know, different edits and lengths and all of that. And so all of this stuff with the landmine, which is, you know, very much sort of padding, if you like, actually makes this episode as it stands on its own this very tense, establishing the battlefield sort of episode, and isn't really padding. I think it's legitimate, and I think that's only partially because it's done really well. There are other directors, or if it had been done in studio, the Doctor just having to tread on a landmine would have been, just them having to do that would have just been a bit tiresome. But actually, that scene is done very well. It's played very well. I like the thing about him saying Harry's no point is both dying and now Doctor, all of that. I like the relationship that the Doctor and Harry have when they do that sort of slightly indirect conversations with each other. I love this TARDIS crew, actually. And then I remember being quite shocked because this is suddenly the first time we're on videotape, and you suddenly go, oh God, now it suddenly looks like every other Doctor Who, or because it's videotape of outside, although it's a trench, it's still outside, isn't it? Trying, inside being outside, it suddenly go, oh, well, this is Doctor Who as on sets doing their best, but you're not kidding anybody. Having had whatever it is we've had, 10 minutes of film. So that's another reason that landmine stuff is really good, because it's really sucked us into the world, and that's slightly jarring, that change, even though they fill it with smoke and they've done their best with it, and Duncan Brown's an excellent lighting designer, but it is to a modern audience that is it jars, and especially if you're like, and you can see where the smoke gun is there. The smoke comes in from the corner. But having listened to this, of course, on the cassette, have I contextualised this enough? Actually, that there was a cassette, an edited version of this story available on cassette before the days of home video, when we could just watch Doctor Who whenever we wanted. So it was like Gold Duster, but it was the only Doctor Who story you could sort of experience in that way. So if you had it, it was all you had, and so you went over and over and over again. But of course, on audio, the change from the location to the studio happens without you even realising it. So my brain had never taken the leap that these scenes in the trenches were any different to the scenes that were outside. Although, of course, we get that stark change in quality from film to VT. Here's Richard Reeves as the Khalid leader. There was people had sort of lost track of him. I think there was a rumour that he died, but I know a couple of people wrote to him very recently and got signed pictures back, so he's still about. He features quite heavily in the cassette. Most of his scenes are in the cassette, whereas actually in the story itself, there's quite a few characters that are very familiar if you're a fan of the cassette, who actually in the story itself do as little as some other characters who you don't see it. You don't feature at all in the cassette, so that's interesting. I'm going to go on about the cassette a lot, aren't I? I'm sorry about that. Guy Siner, General Raven. The other thing about this story is there's a BBC comedy called Allo Allo, set during the Second World War, the occupation of is it France or Belgium? France, and it's a Croft and Perry. It's not Croft and Perry though. It's Jeremy Lloyd. It's a comedy made by in the style of the Dad's Armies, the Heidi Highs, the Yang Milords, those fine traditions of British comedy, doing that really odd thing of making a comedy out of a terrifying and awful period of very recent history, and somehow getting away with it, and also spoofing one of the best programmes BBC dramas ever made, Secret Army, to the extent that Secret Army is now only seen as the thing that inspired Allo Allo, which is to everybody's disadvantage and shame, because Secret Army is really one of the best BBC dramas ever made, and if you haven't seen it, I urge you so to do. I believe it's on BritBox now. I have it on DVD. But anyway, Guy Siner here is in Allo Allo as Lieutenant Gruber, who is the gay German officer, and it's a very sweet performance that he gives. But Hilary Minster, who's also turns up in this, is also in Allo Allo. So it's interesting that Doctor Who and sitcom cast its Nazis from the same cloth. And this is clever, of course, because I like the point the Doctor makes later about very young generals, which is a very clever way of showing how desperately awful and consuming of life this war has been, if Guy Siner there is playing General. And of course he gets the line about exterminating the Thals, which he delivers with ferocity, but he's a boy, he's the Nazi youth. It's clever, so lots of little clever touches there. I love the way he says you'll never get out of here alive. I worked with Guy recently on a corporate video. In fact, it was the reason I did it. Lovely chap called David Mansell said, will you come and do a corporate video? And I was like, it's a long way to come. I like David. And I go, he said, but and I wouldn't normally do it. I try not to travel for much, and but it was a safety video thing. He said, and Guy Siner's doing it, and because David's such a good and experienced TV director, all the casts he gets are always good. So you go, oh well, if it's I'll do it if it's a day with a really interesting cast of good people. And and there were some people from more recent telly as well, but Guy was the lure for me. I got to work with General Raven. Nice fellow. And yes, and I like that set of with the battlefield, which I'd forgotten from watching it and hadn't sort of pictured quite when I listened to the cassette. I think you can get yourself a tin and put £1 in every time I say cassette. We'll raise a fortune for charity. I like Sarah's yellow coat. But yes, it's very good. The way that the Khalid civilization is depicted is excellent. And it's amazing, isn't it, how this was commissioned by the team of Letts and Dix, but it is very much a Hinchcliffe Holmes production. It's amazing how, short, how many stories is this? It's what's 3 after Robot, 4 after Planet of Spiders. It's a different show. It's tougher. It's grittier. Look at that lighting from Duncan Brown. It's excellent. The attention to detail of making it, I think what Philip Hinchcliffe would call muscular. It's muscular storytelling. It's a muscular depiction, within the confines of it being a kids' tea time drama. But the lines are a little crueler. The performances are a little more uncompromising, or a little less compromising. And our heroes are wielding guns and shoving them in the smalls of people's backs. And here is the amazing Peter Miles, who I have to say, I've encountered Peter a few times, and he was an eccentric fellow. He was quite a strange man, and he was nothing like as cold as he is as Nida here. He was a bit more of a turn. He had a bit of patter about him, and yet I think he is absolutely pitch perfect as Nida here. I think it's an absolutely superb performance, a brilliant piece of casting, and I love the fact, in lesser Doctor Who, that the villain would be undermined there because the Doctor would have tricked him there, but Nida is not tricked. And I also like the fact that he tells Raven to get down because he's conserving his fellow soldier, because he's a resource that needs conserving. And I love the line that he gets about, we'll find out what's different about them by autopsy, that he's just about to say. That is this society, this setup, this world in a nutshell. And the fact that they look like Nazis. And I like the fact that Nida, I think one of the great things about Nida is he doesn't enjoy it. There's no cruel smirk there. It's cold, it's clinical, it's efficient. And that's why it's even more frightening. And a word for Tom Baker. Come on. I've not even mentioned him. And machine guns make a difference. Graham Harper knows this in Caves of Androzani. I like a laser bolt, but for this story, the machine guns are really, really important. It's a shame that you get that sort of Venetian blind effect from machine guns in the studio. And isn't it amazing that viewers and television people just have to go, well, we get lines when there's guns, and if we want guns, we get the lines. But look at all these. I think all these shots in the on location with the cowled figures silhouetted, and just the colour, that chalky, dusty landscape. Where the stones are sharp, and there's rusty things, and you know, you can imagine sort of shrapnel burying itself into somebody's thigh. You know, it's you can imagine broken teeth of people getting knocked about. It's that kind of environment, which, you know, it's not the jungles of Spyrodon, which are slightly more. I know there's a bit on location there, but it's slightly more fantastical. There's nothing fantastical about this. You know, people in balaclavas, people have those whatever those waterproof cloaks are called, which are very reminiscent to me of, you know, German soldiers in World War One, and all of that stuff's very haunting because, you know, it's people within living memory, or certainly was at the time, and living history, and you know, genuine people in horrific situations, which are just so evocative. So a word, and just shooting through barbed wire, and we love the mutos with their smoking feet. It's amazing how much you value dry ices in productions like this. I mean, look at all that mist, but then you've got the muto with his smoking foot as well. I mean, I don't know what that suggests. I don't know why his foot's smoking, but it's effective, and it's pretty grim. And you know, again, sometimes shambling aliens. That's a brilliant shot of Peter Miles's eye through the spyglass, and it accentuates his iron cross as well, which I think is a bit too on the nose, and they do remove it later on. I think, you know, if you can be metaphors for Nazis without dressing exactly the same as Nazis. But yes, shambling aliens like the mutos can sometimes be a little bit embarrassing. You know, grunting. Actors unconvincingly sort of grunting away. But the mutos, silent and just a sort of slightly contorted shape that's a sort of parody of the normal human silhouette is you know, it's effectively different enough to be unsettling and grotesque. I think everything is so well judged here. And I like the sort of uneasiness between, and I feel this is great. I feel like because of the set feels like it has a roof. It feels like we're in a bunker, or you know, or we're underground, or we're protected. The sense of place is very good. I love this speech that he does. They were banished into the ways that they live and scavenge like animals. He's so good. And look at race pure. We must keep the Khaled race pure. And look how he holds his gaze. He's totally unintimidated by the Doctor. And a very harsh policy, said the Doctor, speaking volumes. I mean, the exchange here, and your views are not important. And I just love little touches like that. The army has prisoners. The elite are a different thing. The little factions there. And it shows the pecking order. So you think, you know, normally you go, well, the general's going to be somebody that's in charge. Oh no, there's this other bunch. What's that about? And doesn't this have? This episode has the line as well, doesn't it? They'll be hanged instead of shot. You know, war is hell. But it cleverly and economically, and I suspect it's. I mean, I may be being unfair on Terry Nation, but I sense the hand of Robert Holmes in those little economical bits of world building. They nobody ever went, should we be a bit more subtle about the Nazi thing? I don't mind it, but and of course it's less stark now because there's so many World War II films at this period. I wonder if it would have been perhaps a bit too overfamiliar. Here is you know, watching it, if you were to do a sort of, you know, Doctor Who marathon and all you were watching was Doctor Who, or you know, you pluck this off the shelf having watched a load of modern stuff, I think it's perhaps more effective. But there were a lot of Nazis on TV and films at this period of time. And of course, Terry Nation's. This is what I will credit Terry Nation with, is splitting the TARDIS team up, which is a great way of telling the story. And here we have the beginning of Davros, which again now, because there's a lot to say about Davros. So I was born in between this and Destiny. So Davros was already established by the time I knew about Doctor Who, but I hadn't seen him. Destiny is one of my very, very first memories, and I remember Davros coming, because I knew Davros was dead. So Davros was old and dead, even though actually, from where I was positioned, he was new, because he was in the last Dalek story that had been transmitted. But to me, Genesis was, like all of the other Daleks, like Day or Master Plan or whatever. It was an old Dalek story. The fact that, when I was watching Doctor Who, it was only a couple of years old, made no difference. It's a great cliffhanger. I think it's a better cliffhanger at the time than it is now, because it's got so many things that are sort of so familiar, and we know with Davros the best is yet to come. But as a reveal, that's pretty good. It always annoys me that they get Davros, Nyder and Garman all get sort of bunched together on the credits. I think they deserve bigger writing and more space to themselves, which they never quite get. Michael Wisher never gets a single credit caption, I don't think. And I'm sure Garman gets further down the credits as he gets more to do, which makes it a bit annoying for him. Anyway, only I care about this stuff. Elmer Cossey, film cameraman. Wow, well, he went on to have a terrific career, Elmer Cossey, actually, in movies. So, the photography is absolutely superb. So I'm going to pause that, and I'm using the wrong remote control. So I'm going to pause that, because I need to choose my favourite thing about that episode. Oh, God. It could be anything. There's nothing bad in it. It's brilliant, isn't it? Even if you're not a Genesis liker, that doesn't put a foot wrong. It's a terrific production. It's a flawless cast. The Khalid leader guy has very 70s hair, and there's that stark bit between location and VT, but that was those would have that they were just in the grammar of the time. I think it doesn't put a foot wrong, and it has so much to recommend it. The dialogue sings. It has an advantage, of course, that it's etched into my brain stem because of repeated listening over and over and over again. Anyway, look, what is my favourite thing about that? Oh, there's so much that's good about it. Shall I say... I will say the film work, because that encompasses that brilliant slow motion deaths at the beginning, which is such a simple thing to do that all immediately says, I mean business, and this is horrible. But at the scene with the Time Lord, which has got it's got the Seventh Seal thing going on about it, but it's also got some cracking lines, and a great performance from John Franklin Robbins. But all the silhouettes, the smoke, the chalky bricks, there's just the sound of going over all those rocks, bits of rusty metal lying around. And the fact that so much of it, the fact that it's a Doctor Who story that opens with about 10 minutes of film, I think is so it really sets its stall. It puts its money up front, as it were. And then, of course, we know the stuff that's later on. It involves, good dialogue and good acting, but it's what it's done is it's sucked us into that world. So I'm going to say the stuff on film, although honourable mention to, the dialogue and the world building and Peter Miles. I've got to be careful with Peter Miles because he is amazing. I'm sure David's going to choose him. So I've got to choose him before David does, because if the rules are, if I choose something in episode 1 that is then chosen for episode 4, I do get the points for that. However, if David chooses something now that I would have perhaps chosen in 2 or 3 episodes' time, that's tough. I have to choose something else, because once it is chosen by my guest, it is claimed and I cannot get points for that. So probably thinking that David will now choose Peter Miles as Nyder. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Right. Episode 1. Episode 1 of Genesis of the Daleks. Well, I was blown away. There was so much in it. This Nazi world, the war between... I forgot their fucking names. the ongoing Dalek war, which we'd seen in the movie Doctor Who and the Daleks, which I think was the first movie I ever saw, and which we kept returning to, and which I will be returning to. But for me, the thing about the episode, which I'm going to remember, is not something which I can share with hardly anyone else. It's that I saw it at a friend's house, and that was kind of weird, because I was a fairly solitary kid, and Doctor Who, famously, sofas, all that, was something you'd watch with your family or on your own. I happened to be at someone else's house. Charles Gurry, his name is. I went to school with him. His nickname was Bince, because Bince Gurry, do you see, it was kind of a weird pun. And he wasn't a close friend of mine, but on this occasion, 8th of March 1975, I was at his family house. And maybe I went round for tea, I imagine so, because we watched it. And that's an aspect of Doctor Who that people tend to forget. It tends to be, I'm a fan, it belongs to me. There are no other people watching it in the world. How dare you say the nodules on the Cybermen's head are wrong? In fact, they are the 1974 nodules from Defence of the Cybermen and all that. So that for me is my thing about episode 1.
Well, I was never going to choose the fact that I watched it at Charles Gubbage's house, because I didn't. But I love that, and I'm pleased that this podcast opens up the possibility for that sort of thing, because let's face it, the competition is moot. I have singularly failed to ever win. It's just a jumping off point for us to discuss different things. And actually, I do have that in common with David, that I didn't watch this at somebody else's house, but of course my cassette was given to me by a friend, and that showed a friendship, an sort of unspoken thing of somebody who was slightly, because we didn't have an awful lot of money, so I didn't have many things. A friend just sort of going, oh, you hang on to that, because they did have things, and this particular thing would have meant more to me than to him. But he wasn't ostentatious with that. I was just allowed to hang on to it. And I'd forgotten about that until we started talking about this, my friend Ollie. And I spoke to him very recently, because we're Facebook friends, and he's doing a project where he's trying to remember things from school. And we had a right old chat for a couple of hours, and we were great friends for when we were younger. And I think that's important, that you break bread with other people when you watch Doctor Who. And some of my very good friendships now are through people I met when I came out of the closet as a Doctor Who fan with my one-man show, my Set by Doctor Who scarf, having not really known any Doctor Who fans apart from my mate Mark and a couple of others, but they weren't involved in the world of fandom, in inverted commas. And suddenly I met all sorts of people who I could nip down to the pub with and discuss the cyber nodules from Defence of the Cybermen. I don't know where he got that from. And I have a common language with everybody, from somebody who works in television that I've never met, like David, to a policeman called Rick, who stopped me once when I was wearing a Doctor Who scarf and said nice things, and is now, I know, a listener to this podcast who, as I record this, pulled up when I was walking somewhere tonight and said, did I want a lift? And I was nearly there. And I was already late, and we had a 5-minute conversation about Doctor Who, and we're going to go and meet for a coffee. And because it's what I enjoy talking about, and it's because I've met so many people from so many different backgrounds, and you immediately have that bond, the commonality, and that's a good point that David raises. Even though I wasn't going to have a chance in hell of that being a thing, as we go, who's either going to choose Peter Miles or the Nazis? And he's chosen the fact he watched it at his friend's house. But I like what that has opened up as a conversation. And boy, I like Genesis of the Daleks. Okay, well, I think we're on a roll. So we've got the opening instalment where the story hasn't really started. It was all mood and tension and a bit of character. So I would like to think that now we can begin. Well, next time on Happy Times and Places.
And yeah, it says here, shamelessly plug anything you have coming up or your online presence. Well, I'm on Twitter, and on Twitter I'll be talking about my forthcoming quiz book, Quantick's Quite Difficult Quiz Book, which contains, I hope, many, many Doctor Who related rounds, including Doctor Who villain or musical instrument. I'm sure you can guess the crossover there. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest this time around is David Quantick, who can be found on Twitter at Quantick, Quantick, and his book is out as this is released in November 2021. So do go get that. Thank you to patrons of this podcast, to include Lisa Gledhill, David Green, Robin Groen, Paul J. Guest, Susan Harrison, Steve Hatcher, Duncan Harvey, Stephen Hill, Simon Hodges, Sam Hollingsworth, Matthew Hooliston, Darren Howard, Gregory Hudson, David Hughes, Paul Ingerson, Robert Jewell, Christopher Joyce, Judith Jackson, William Keith, Matthew Kilburn, Andy Kitching, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Andrew Lester, Andrew Llewellyn, Jacob Lumley, Nate Lynch, Darrell McLean, Pip Madeley, Nick Mellish, James Miller, and Justin E. Monaghan. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you would like to join that list of patrons' names, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Tiers start from as little as £3 a month. It's fairly egalitarian. Most of the goodies are available at the bottom tier. You can get an extra discount on that and indeed all tiers if you sign up for a year. 10% off for signing up for a year in one go. There are advanced releases and patron exclusives, including a podcast called Far Too Much Information, which you only get if you are a patron. It will never come out otherwise. But that's quite a commitment, and times are hard. So I'll tell you what, you could go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and just buy me a coffee every now and again. It's a metaphorical coffee. I don't drink coffee. I'll spend it on bills and household cleaning products, but certainly nothing frivolous. And you can do that whenever you like, whenever you think I'm looking hungry, lean, or like I need to clean my kitchen. But I also know that times are tough and not everybody can contribute financially. I'm just happy that you're listening. I'm grateful to you for doing so. But what you could do, which really does help, is go online anywhere you like and sing from the rooftops how much you enjoy these podcasts, if indeed you do. If you don't, just don't say anything. If you don't, you should really have stopped listening by now, and you've only got yourself to blame. There's a lot of podcasts out there. But if you do enjoy this stuff, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and give this a 5-star rating. Give it a positive review, because that just helps it to ascend the charts of the algorithms and visibilities, and just makes it more worthwhile me doing this stuff. It does my ego no harm too, and it's a bruised little thing. I had a complicated childhood, and now I'm making up for it by basically seeking your approval in as many media as is physically and vocally possible. So go on, make an old man very happy. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Hadoke Podcasts. That's for just these podcasts. But if you're interested in the other stuff that I do, follow me at Toby Hadoke. Yes, I've even got 2 Twitter streams so that I can seek your approval from more than one angle. Oh God, even I hate me by the end of this. Anyway, there we go. That's all of that's the Oliver Twist bit. No, now you can't have any more. If you want to come to my comedy night in Manchester, it's 8 p.m. every Tuesday at the Bread Shed. The night is called Excess Malarkey. It's been running for 24 years, so it must be getting something right. Top comedians? It's only a word I've had to say every Tuesday for 24 years. Top comedians from the national and international circuit, all for a very affordable price. We keep the prices as low as possible and the comedians as good as they can be. And we've had loads of stars of the future and of the present on, because it's a much-loved club. If you can't get to Manchester, you still have the opportunity to sample it by going to twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. We do a live comedy show, comics from the international comedy circuit, and me, the affable glue that holds it together.
at 8 p.m. on the first Sunday of every month. But there are clips and highlights and everything else still hanging around thereafter. And the live show itself is available for 14 days after it airs, which is, remember, the first Sunday of every month. I think that's probably just about enough from me. The reason I say cassette the way that I say cassette is because I'm sure there's a Doctor Who thing. Is it Tom Baker on the Tom Baker years where he says cassette? And so you could say it's an homage, but I think it's probably more accurately an affectation. But nonetheless, it's a Tom Baker flavoured affectation, so I'm gonna stick with it. But, okay, for all you fans of correct pronunciation, cassette. You happy now?